Now, this is the first of the series of webinars what we're going to run. Back to the basics. This is where I'm going to take you through the very basics of NGINX on how to install it, how to configure it as a web server, a reverse proxy, and a load balancer. So with that, we'll get started with the deck. A couple of words about me. So my name is Jay. As Cheryl mentioned, I'm based in Melbourne, and I'm a technical solutions architect for NGINX. I have been working for NGINX for about 8 months. Feels like 8 years. Based out of Melbourne, I used to work for IBM before in the DevOps area. Then I joined CA Technologies in the monitoring side of things, and I'm now with NGINX doing a multitude of activities within the broad spectrum of capabilities which NGINX has to offer. In today's workshop, we'll start with a very brief introduction of NGINX on where it started and what challenges it is set out to solve. We'll install NGINX, we'll configure it as a web server, reverse proxy, load balancer, and towards the end, before we start the Q&A, I'll show you some of the links to the resources what we have, where you can go out and run a lot of labs and do a lot of training or tutorials as you want. So we'll start off with the quick evolution map of NGINX. It started off way back in 2003, 2004 time period, where it was created to essentially solve one problem, and that problem was C10K. So the C10K problem essentially entails the ability to serve 10,000 concurrent connections from one compute unit. And as the years evolved, the adoption of NGINX grew exponentially. And so the features and functionality it brought to the table as well. So from a web server, it started off as a reverse proxy, a load balancer, and in the modern day and age, we help a lot of enterprises in their microservices journey. That's because of two things. One, it is extremely lightweight. If you wanted to, you could put NGINX on a floppy disk. And two, it is extremely easy to configure, which I'll demonstrate as a part of this workshop in the next few minutes. As we stand at the moment, in 2020, we've got NGINX Controller, which helps you essentially manage your all things NGINX Plus. So NGINX Plus is the commercial offering, and a lot of you might know NGINX, which you may have used with, could be the open source instance as well. In 2013 is when we came up with the first commercial offering. In today's session, I'll show you both. So the first part of the demo which I'll do, or the workshop which I'll do, would be with NGINX open source, and then towards the end I have a few specific features I'll show you which takes you through what NGINX Plus can offer. Now, just some fun facts. NGINX is #1 web server in the world at the moment. Most number of websites currently use NGINX. If you look at the percentage of traffic served by NGINX, it sits at somewhere about 38%. And if you look at the total number of websites, it's about 459 million websites which run on NGINX in some capacity, based on the numbers which I checked this morning. Now, I talked about the multitude of capabilities earlier. Now, this slide just demonstrates the complete breadth of it. Now, all these features and functions you see here, a lot of other vendors in the market do offer this technology. But what differentiates us, or what sets us apart, is that NGINX is able to deliver all of this functionality listed out here from one individual instance of NGINX. Now, if you're running it in your production environment, I would not recommend you go out and do that. But if you just want to have a play around, have a install in your demo environment, go out and you can go out and keep adding features to it. What we're going to concentrate on this session is the first three, the web server, the RP, and the LB. And as I mentioned earlier, in the modern architectures, we are the default choice for all the Kubernetes ingress controllers. We enhance your move to microservices by acting as a sidecar proxy in your environments as well. And of course, we have a suite of security products as well. Just to name one, NGINX App Protect has just been released last week. I'd encourage all of you to go out and look it up. So with that, let's workshop. So before we get going with the actual hands-on stuff, I apologize, we'll be changing a few screens here, so there might be some lag, so bear with me. And there's multiple moving parts. So I have prayed the demo goat, so I'm hoping everything would work well. But we are at their behest. So if you look at an enterprise architecture, this is how a normal enterprise architecture looks like. So you've got a client or a browser, they go via internet, and there's an NGINX instance which would act as a reverse proxy, a load balancer, or a web server, or all in one, and your service is at the back end. Now, this is extremely simplified versions of it. I have completely blatantly ignored so many of the hops which would go in here otherwise, but this is just for our high-level understanding. But what are we actually going to build today? So this is what we're going to build today. We've got a client or a browser. So I've got my local laptop on which I'm running a virtual machine. I'd install NGINX on my virtual machine, set it up as a reverse proxy, load balancer, and a web server. We'll also serve a couple of static websites from the web server running on the same instance of NGINX. And then I've got a couple of services running on my AWS lab as well, which we would go out and load balance on as well. So sounds simple. So what you'll need, if you want to try and be hands-on and follow me while I'm performing all these tasks, you'd need a laptop. It can be a desktop as well. You'd need an internet connection. You'd need a Linux host or a virtual machine, or if you're using Docker, you need Docker up and running. And if you've already installed NGINX in your instance right now, just go in and run the nginx-v command to see what version of NGINX you're running. Now, installing NGINX on any Linux-based virtual machine is extremely simple as going out and just going sudo apt-get install NGINX. That would go out and pull NGINX from that specific Linux distributions repository and install it for you. If you're using Docker, you can just go out and run the command I have got on the screen over here. That it would go out and pull the latest image of NGINX from the repository. So with this, I'm going to switch my screens to command line and the PowerPoint so that they're both on the same screen. So bear with me just for 1 minute, and we are back sharing the screen. So on the top here, I've got 3 virtual machines. The first one, which you see with the orange circle, is my AWS instance. I'm hoping that I would not need to touch that during this session. Second machine is my Ubuntu UDF machine. This is where I'll perform all the tasks for this session. And the third machine I have is the Ubuntu default installer. This is where I'll show you when you go out and install from a default repository what you actually get. So with that, I'm just going to fire up a command here. It says sudo apt-get install nginx. So what this is going to do, it is going to go out to that operating system's repository and pull out the version of nginx it has to offer. Now, this is completely fine to go out and do that, but what I have actually done on my Ubuntu UDF machine is that the steps you see on your screen down here, so I have included the nginx's official repository, and what that does in turn is it enables me to go out to nginx's repo and pull the latest version of NGINX open source as compared to what my operating system's repository has to offer. Now, if I come back to my Ubuntu default machine, I'll quickly go in and show you the difference between the two. So if I go nginx-v over here, what you would see is the version of NGINX I have by just following the default commands of my operating system. I got version 1.14. But on my Ubuntu machine, where I added these repositories, added the signing keys, and then went out and installed NGINX. Okay, just give us a minute. So, technical glitch number 1. Not to worry. What I'll do is I'll give you guys a minute to go out and install and get familiar with your NGINX while I'll just bring that instance back up. Now, one of the other set of commands you need to familiarize yourself with is all the NGINX commands. So these are the useful commands you need to run on your NGINX. So what I'll do right now is encourage all of you to go out and just type out a few of these commands where you can just go nginx-v NGINX-V, which would go out and pull out every single module which you have got enabled within your system out here. So while you're doing that, I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to go out and familiarize yourself with these commands. I'll pull up this other page as well. Now, I've got a link at the bottom out here, which you can copy, or you can go to nginx.com and get the details on how to install that from there. So I'm waiting for a few of you guys to finish installing your NGINX instance. And I'll just connect to my instance again, and we'll get started with the next steps. Perfect. So this is a repo what we want. So this is what I had created earlier, where I had gone to NGINX's official repo and created the install. So we'll call it, use this. I will save it out here, and we'll make it a different color. Perfect. So this is the specific instance we'll use. Now, up until this point, what we have done is we have now successfully installed NGINX. On one of the machines, you've used the Ubuntu repos. On what I have used the official NGINX repo. Now, I'll quickly show you the difference on why you would go to the official NGINX repo and pull the install. So if I go to my CD, so number one is the version. So you can see when I went to NGINX's repo, I got the version 1.19, which is the latest, as compared to when I went to the Ubuntu and it got the version 1.14. Second differentiator is the file structure and the number of appended files, or the files which would help with your NGINX configuration it creates. So if you download the version from the official NGINX repository, the file structure looks like this. I'm just highlighting on the screen that it's only got a few files which it requires. Whereas if you go to the install from Ubuntu, okay, what you see is a structure more like this. Now, this would be very familiar to some of those guys who are used to Apache, so it helps with that. Now, I'm going to work with this, so we're just going to kill this specific instance, and work here. All right, so as a step two, what we're going to do now is configure NGINX as a web server. But hey, we've already installed NGINX, so by default, it should have installed a web server. So let's go out and test that. So for this, I'm going to run a quick command on my screen. And you see it is returning a page for me. So if you just go and type curl localhost on your local machines, you'd be able to see some response back. We'll run it again, and you'd see the welcome to NGINX page out here. And it shows that it's already serving content on port 80, which is the default localhost. Now, let's familiarize ourselves with the structure of the file of what nginx.conf entails. So for that, I'm going to quickly jump into, I'm going to do cat on my nginx.conf so you see what the file structure actually looks like. On my PowerPoint slide here, this is something like, this is a default structure of what an nginx conf file looks like. Your file may be different based on which repo you pull the configuration from. Now, a lot of that code which is commented out, you can go out and delete it so that it reduces the clutter and you're able to understand what everything does. Now, just to try and help you understand the standard structure of how NGINX configuration file works, we've got a HTTP block under which it entails a server block and a location block. Now, for today's session, we're only going to be concentrating on these three specific blocks. And the nginx.conf block, which includes the HTTP block, and within the HTTP block, what we have is include command, which goes out and reads anything.conf included within the conf.d directory. So just make sure that your nginx.conf file has include defined within the HTTP realm. So go out and check that. Now I'm going to jump onto my box and go to the conf.d directory and see what I have. So if I do a ls on it, yes, I do have a default.conf. I'm going to do a cat on default.conf, and as you see on the screen, the file is fairly big, but most of the content you see out here, it's all commented out. So if you remove all the commented out lines, the code or the script would look like what you see on the screen down here. Now, with that, we want to try and serve a couple of static files. So go out on this specific GitHub link. I've shared this link in the chat box earlier as well. One of the panelists out here would be able to point you to that GitHub repo as well. That what we're doing is we're essentially creating two static files, which we're going to serve using our NGINX as a web server. So with that, I'm going to go out and create those two files. I have already created these files earlier, but I'll show you the content of it just to show what they are. And if I go within the directory and I go cat on index.html file, it is just a very simple HTML file. And what we need to do right now is to go out back to our NGINX configuration and make sure we make the configuration changes to be able to go out and serve this specific file. So we've got app1 here and we've got an app2 here. You'd need to create two specific files in two specific directories. If I show you the directory structure. So within the opt/services/app1, or within the services directory, I have two directories, app1 and app2. Now your structure could be different, but just make sure you remember what your directory structure is. And when you create your configuration file, you need to make sure you follow the same directory structure on where your content is actually located. So with that, let's go in and edit our config file to try and reflect what we want to try and serve. So let's jump in. I'm just going to go sudo. Now, I'm following the steps slightly different than what I've noted on the screen. Some of you guys might have noted that, but it's just as a reference, whichever is the easiest way and the most convenient way for you, go out and edit the files accordingly. So with this, what I'm going to do is insert a couple of blocks. Essentially what it's doing, it's listening on port 8001 and serving the content from /opt/services/app1. I'll save the file, I'll make sure it exists. And this is where I want to go and check if my syntax is correct for my NGINX instance. So I'll just go sudo nginx-t. And it's come back as nginx.conf, syntax is okay. So I'm okay to proceed with the configuration reload. And this is a command you use to reload the configuration, and it has done that without throwing any errors. Now, just to test if our configurations actually work, and if we're now serving these two new pages which we've created, we'll just go out and curl our localhost on those two ports which we used. So go curl. Go curl localhost 8001, and as you can see, it is serving the HTML page. I've got my app1, red app1 being served. I'll do the same with the second port which I'm hosting, and it goes and serves the app2. Now, at this stage, what we've done is we're serving two applications or services using NGINX. As a next step, what we're going to do is we're going to configure the reverse proxy and we'll load balance across these two apps. So for that, we'll need to include what is known as an upstream and a new server block. So the upstream essentially lists all the services you want to load balance against, and a new server block is the route in to try and access those services. So if you look at the new server which we've created, it's now going to listen on port 8080. And when you go to port 8080, the location what we have is we're using the proxy pass directive to forward it to the upstream backend service, which essentially are the two services what we had earlier. So with that, let's go and append or add that specific block to our NGINX configuration. So for that, I'm going to go back to edit. Editing my B2B conf again. Now, the files or the text which I'm using for this edit, they're available on my GitHub repo as well, which I have shared with all of you earlier. And I'm just going to paste the block right here, and we'll just make sure it is correct and it's not missed any text. So with inclusion of that block, what we can do is load balance against across those two services. So to test the configuration, once again, I'm going to come out here and I'm going to do sudo nginx-t. Aha, so it has got a directive which says health check, which has failed. So I'm going to go in and fix that. Health check directive is only available for NGINX Plus. And I'm going to quickly come out here and disable that. And now that I have commented that specific directive out, we can see that syntax is okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and reload the configuration. No problems. So to test this configuration change out, what we can do is I'm going to go to my local host and curl for the port 8080, which is the load balancer port for the two applications or services what we've created. And when I hit the local host, I should get my app1. But if I keep hitting it again, you'd see the app2. I'll hit it again, then you'd see app1. Essentially what it's doing a round robin across all the specific upstreams available within that upstream block. Boom. So now we are load balancing and reverse proxying because the port coming in is 8080 and your backend services are actually running on 8001. Now, what I'm going to do at this stage, all the content we're serving are from the local host itself. I'm going to go out and call a service which is actually running on my AWS instance externally on this specific URL and port. So let's go and add that into our configuration. So go back to the top. We'll see the number of servers available here. And I'm going to manually add that in. It's missing the server directly at the front and should be ready to go. Perfect. Now we'll come back out here and follow the standard practice that of checking if the configuration is correct. Yep, the syntax is okay. And I'll go out and do NGINX reload. So there's no problems here. Now, what you should be able to see here is that when you come out and again hit the URL for your load balancer, you'd add a new service or a new application within your pool of servers. You're actually load balancing again. So if I come out and hit, we've got app 1, we've got app 2, and whoa, we did not create app 3 as a web server, but it has still got app 3. So it is actually serving that content from the instance which is running on AWS. So this is exactly what we did. We went out and tested it so that we are load balancing against an external instance. So if you look at us, what we've achieved so far is we've successfully installed NGINX instance. We have configured it to serve a couple of static files or applications or services. We have configured it as a load balancer, and we've configured it as a reverse proxy. Now, at this stage, I'm sure everyone was able to follow this, right? At this stage, I'm going to jump onto my another virtual machine, which has got NGINX Plus installed on it. So bear with me while I get that up and running, and we'll hope it's got no technical glitches this time around. Go. This is my Ubuntu virtual machine, and this is where we're going to look at a couple of features like live activity monitoring. This is a feature only available for NGINX Plus. If you're an open source user, you don't have the ability to go out and enable this. So the way you go out and enable live activity monitoring dashboard is by including a new server block within your configuration file. All it's doing, it is going out and it's serving the content from this specific dashboard, and it's got an internal API enabled, which enables the NGINX instance to push out stats to the specific dashboard. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the configuration file I have for that specific dashboard. So this is my Ubuntu instance running on my machine again. Now this is different than the one I was using earlier. Now let's look at the configuration I have here. So the files I have are exactly identical, but the only difference here is I have got a server block which is listening on port 8005. Let's go out and see what we can see on that specific port. And there we go. So this is the live activity monitoring dashboard we have for NGINX. As you can see, we've got 3 server instances, and this is the one which is running on AWS, and that's not serving the content locally. If I come out here and go 8080, it should be able to see the application, and we'll hit refresh a few times. You can see it looped through application 1, application 2, and application 3. And if I come back to my dashboard, you can see that the requests were distributed evenly across the 3 upstream instances. So we have seen how to enable activity monitor. Now, let's go in and see how to enable health check for all the upstream instances. So with that, now, as we found out earlier, this feature is not available for NGINX open source. And when I tried to run that specific directive in my open source instance, it came back with an error. Now let's see what we get if I enable that specific directive on my NGINX Plus instance. Right. So I've got my health check plus feature over here. Wait. And there we go. We'll save it. Follow the standard process. We'll make sure the syntax is correct. And if the syntax is correct, we'll go out and reload NGINX. Now, what happens with this is if you go back to the dashboard, you'd have this option called Health Monitor, and it would go out and perform health checks on all your upstream instances. So if I come back to my slide deck here and quickly show you this, the default health check interval is 5 seconds. But you can go out and override that interval and set some parameters as well that, hey, if it fails continuously 3 times, it's only then flag it as a fail. Similarly, if it passes twice, then mark it as the server is up and running. So I'd encourage you guys to go out and opt for NGINX trial license and try out these features. Now with this, I'm going to quickly test out zero downtime configuration reload. So while your server is up and running, it is serving content. One of your application teams or project teams decide to include a new service. Now, when you go out and push this configuration change into the NGINX instance, that does not mean your existing connections are going to have any outage. Now, we'll go out and test that. What I'll do is I've got a JMeter instance up and running. We'll do a quick performance test on this specific IP of the load balancer. And what we're looking for is we should not get any non-200 returns. So for that, let's quickly have a look. So this is my JMeter instance. I'm sure most of you would be familiar with it. I'll just reconfirm the IP address of this specific box. And that is correct. So this is 139. Here, we close this. Move to my JMeter 139, and the port we're listening to is port 8080. We'll change that to 8080 over here. And what we're doing is we're creating 1,000 users load on the NGINX instance for up to 60 seconds. So I'll start this, and what we're aiming for is in the view results tree, there should be no red flags. Everything should be green. So with that, let's start the test. And while the test is running, I'll go and insert a new upstream instance in my NGINX configuration. So we just started the test, and we'll view the tree. I'll move this away, come out here. And I'll just enable this. We'll reload the configuration. And what you should be able to see in the health monitor is that the fourth server has now been added. And if I come back to my JMeter screen, there is no requests which has failed. So this goes to show that I pushed out a new configuration change to my NGINX instance, and while we did that, all the active connections were still served, and there was absolutely zero outage while doing it. So this test is finished, and we'll just go out and check the results once again if there is no red, and this green means that we've got a 200 response from all those requests. So now we've demonstrated how configuration reloads happen with NGINX with zero downtime. Also, what you have with NGINX is rate limiting, where you can go out and apply a rate limit to a specific server instance or a specific zone, where you can, I think the value you get with it is essentially stops internal applications going rogue. Say if service A is dependent on service B, if service A is making 1,000 requests per second to service B, and service B, for example, is only capable of catering for 2,000 requests per second, if someone utilizing service A decides to up that to 10,000, that's in turn going to break service B. So when you have rate limit inserted within your NGINX configuration, you can help your services essentially stopping to sabotage each other. It's just one way. Also, you can go out and use IP whitelisting and blacklisting. These are the features which are available with NGINX Plus, and these values can be stored in NGINX's key value store. So you can go out and test this, and when for the rate limit testing, if a specific limit is reached, you'd get the 429 message. Now, with this error messages as well, you can go out and configure however you want these error messages to come up and what message they show on the screen. So guys, with that, that's all I had for this session, which was a back to the basics session. So what we did was we successfully installed NGINX instance. We looked at the difference on what you get when you pull from the default operating system repo as compared to what you get when you go and pull the NGINX instance from NGINX's repository by following those steps on the screen, and also available on NGINX website. We configured a web server, and we were serving two static files on port 8001 and 8002. We configured a reverse proxy and a load balancer, so we polling to port 8080 on the local instance, and also we included a service which is external to the specific VM we're working with. We looked at how active health checks work on NGINX Plus. We looked at the live activity monitoring dashboard, and we also looked at how zero downtime configuration reloads happen with NGINX. So these are a few links to some resources you can go and essentially get started with your journey with NGINX.
Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. The recording and the slides will be available shortly on nginx.com in the webinar page under the resources tab. Have a nice day.